Fellas, UFC 300 just wrapped up and it was stacked from top to bottom with amazing moments. Things that definitely made the UFC 300, the card that it is. So I'm going to be going over the 5 best moments on my personal top 5 list of the best moments to come from UFC 300. Things that I thoroughly enjoyed throughout this card and, the 5 just the best things that happened from UFC 300. Let me know your favourite thing to come from this card. Starting off in number 5, the 5th best part about UFC 300 for me was the fact that we finally have an interesting fighter in women MMA. Now, I know Kayla Harrison isn't the only one. There's Zhang Weili, there's Alexa Grasso, there's Aldana. There's a few fighters in women MMA who come to scrap every single time, but I'm glad that the women's bantamweight division is actually somewhat interesting. Nobody wants to see Pennington fight for a belt. No one wants to see Juliana Pena fight for the belt anymore. I'm glad that Kayla Harrison's in the UFC. She made the Holly Holm fight interesting. If you put Holly Holm against any other fighter, any other contender, it most likely would have been a boring fight. So for Kayla Harrison, you've got to give her credit. She made it interesting. And I'm glad that Kayla Harrison won. She's got an interesting style. She's got, first of all, she's massive. She's 155 pounds. She's an absolute machine in the bantamweight division. And I really do feel like she's going to, now that she's done that to Holly Holm, I feel like she's going to do that to every single bantamweight that she goes against. But no, it was a good performance. Her judo's insane. Her grappling's insane. Best grappler in that division, and all she needs to do is sharpen up her striking, and I feel like she could be a real problem because her ground and pound, her submission game, and obviously her judo, she's just an interesting fighter, and I can't wait to see her absolutely destroy Pennington. Get Pennington away from that belt. I still can't believe she co-main evented a pay-per-view, so we need to get Kayla Harrison, get Pennington out of there, and then maybe from there, and this hasn't been confirmed, but I've got a feeling that, they brought Jose Aldo back, and I've got a feeling that if Kayla Harrison can beat Pennington, they might bring back Amanda Nunes and do a women's super fight with Amanda Nunes, the GOAT of women MMA, against Kayla Harrison. They did it with Jose Aldo. They brought him back. Maybe they'll do it in Brazil, just like they did with Aldo. I don't know. But Kayla Harrison versus Nunes, that would be a super fight in women MMA, and I would actually be somewhat interested in that fight. And I'm not just saying interested for women MMA. I'd be interested in that fight like I'm interested in a lot of men's fights. So, Kayla Harrison, the fact that we've actually got a fun female fighter in the UFC, in the women's bantamweight division to spice it up, I think that's definitely a solid thing to come from UFC 300. Number 4 is the lack of boring fights. Usually on a UFC pay-per-view, there'll usually be 3 or 4, maybe more fights on the card that are kind of classed as boring, snooze fests, fights that, piss breaks. UFC 300, the only fight on this card that I wasn't thoroughly entertained with was Aljamain Sterling versus Calvin Kattar. And even then, you can't really blame him because Aljamain Sterling's whole game plan is to out-grapple, right? He out-grappled Calvin Kattar. He did his job. It was Calvin Kattar who didn't perform on the night. And it just didn't really make for an interesting fight because it kind of just seems like Aljamain Sterling was bullying Kattar with his grappling. But every other fight on that card was amazing. You look at any stage of the card, the early prelims all up to the main card. Every single fight was a banger. Bo Nickel versus Cody Brundage, maybe that wasn't a banger, but it was still good seeing Bo Nickel progress in his career. And even Cody Brundage made it fun with the things he was doing in the octagon. Zhang Weili versus Yang Jianan, that was an amazing performance, amazing display of grappling from Zhang Weili, and then Yang Jianan being the striker that she is made it interesting as well. Every single fight on this card was a banger. I don't even have to go through every fight. It was just stacked with fun fights from top to bottom. And that was the real question going into UFC 300. We all knew that it was the most stacked card of all time, at least on paper, as Anthony Smith would say. We all knew it was the most stacked card on paper, but the real question was it going to perform? And it definitely did. In fact, I'd say that it exceeded the expectations. The amount of moments to come from this card, and the fact that there were barely any more boring stages. I was thoroughly entertained every single minute of this card. So yeah, the fact that we had a lack of boring fights and nearly every single fight on this card was a banger. That, in my opinion, makes UFC 300 what it is. So yeah, the fact that we had a lack of boring fights. At number 3, I've gone for Yuri Prochazka making a comeback against Alexander Rakic. Yuri Prochazka might be one of my favourite fighters in the UFC. The fact that he's so unique, so crafty, so unorthodox, and it works, he's just got to be one of my favourite fighters. So to not only win against Alexander Rakic and now be in title talks, but to do it in the fashion that he did. Because that first round, he was losing. Alexander Rakic was landing with those leg kicks, and he started to become really effective. And then he was landing up top as well. There was a point where I thought he was going to rock Yuri Prochazka from how hard he hit him. But Yuri, he must have an iron chin. How he survived that, I don't know. But yeah, Rakic was definitely winning that first round. Second round comes along, and this is where Yuri started to turn it up. He landed a big shot, a big right hand on Alexander Rakic, wobbled him, and then the next 20 seconds, it was just Yuri Prochazka absolutely beating off on Alexander Rakic until eventually he got the finish. And that's what happens when you question Yuri Prochazka if he's a samurai or not. Nah, Yuri Prochazka, I'm so glad he got that win. That comeback definitely made the prelims what it was. That should have been on the main card. Like I said, I'm not going to overhate on Bo Nickel. It's done now. We don't need to complain about it. But realistically, that should have been on the main card. It was practically the winner of that would have been pushed into a #1 contender fight. And it was actually a somewhat interesting fight. At first, if you watch my videos leading up to this, I was quite skeptical of this matchup. I thought Rakic was going to make it too technical. And even though it wasn't Europraska versus Glover Teixeira type fight, it was still a somewhat interesting fight. So, yeah, Europraska making the comeback that he did and now being pushed into a #1 contender fight. If Yuri wins his next fight, I reckon he gets a title shot, or maybe even weighs in as like the backup for the next title fight. Regardless, I want to see Yuri fight immediately because he's just such an interesting fighter. So, number 3 is Yuri Prochazka making a big comeback. Number 2, we have Alex Pereira sleeping Jamal Hill in the fashion that he did. I mean, if you'd have told most people leading up to this card that Alex Pereira was going to sleep Jamal Hill, they'd have been satisfied. But it wasn't just that. This might have been Alex Pereira's best knockout in the UFC. I mean, he's had a few good knockouts over obviously his debut fight, the knockout over Sean Strickland as well. But this one for me has to be up there with one of the best. It was the way that he did it. First of all, it was so quick. It literally took him like, what, a minute and a half, 2 minutes to knock him out. I was expecting it to go to like the 4th round. So to do it that quickly in the first round and make it look so flawless was one thing. But the way that it happened, Jamal Hill gets a nut shot. Herb Dean tries separating the action. You know, Pereira waves him away, stops him, walks forward towards him, hits him with the iconic left hook, drops Jamal Hill, goes for the finish, gets the finish, emotes on his lifeless body, and then he retains himself as another defense for his light heavyweight belt. And that's got to be one of the best performances from Alex Pereira. To do it in the fashion that he did, I thought he was going to knock him out, but I thought he was going to have to destroy the legs first because I thought Jamal Hill would be able to survive on the feet. He has one of the most powerful left hooks. No, he has the most powerful left hook in the UFC. That knockout definitely, it was a great way to end the card as well because the card was already amazing. So to end it off with Alex Pereira versus Jamal Hill ending in that way definitely made the card what it was. I want to find all the people that were complaining about this fight, saying, oh, it's not UFC 300 worthy, get it off UFC 300. I'm glad that was on UFC 300 now because that made the card what it was. Great way to end the card. And yeah, Alex Pereira knocking out Jamal Hill for me has to take number 2. And then number 1, the best moment to come from UFC 300 is that moment from Gaethje versus Holloway. I don't even have to say what it was. Everyone knows what I'm talking about. The last 10 seconds. I mean, first of all, the fight was interesting. Holloway was really piecing up on Justin Gaethje. Gaethje was attacking the legs of Holloway. He actually dropped him at one point, but for some reason they didn't count it as a knockdown. But those last 10 seconds... You know, they do the clack for the 10 seconds. They both stand in the middle. Holloway points to the floor. They go in the middle, and it looks like they're just trying to take years off each other's life. They both just swing for the fences for the last 10 seconds till eventually, after battering each other for 10 seconds straight, Holloway lands a big shot on Justin Gaethje and knocks him out lifeless, face first on the canvas. That must have hurt for Justin Gaethje. I know he was unconscious, but mate, having a broken nose and then landing face first, that must be horrible for Gaethje. But no, that knockout might have been one of the best knockouts in UFC history. Not just the way that he did it, the fact that he made Justin Gaethje go soulless, limpless. He was just there, unconscious, face first. But the fact that they're leading up to that, they were both just standing in the middle, going for a scrap, that is the definition of a BMF right there. And I'm so glad that was for the BMF belt. And that, in my opinion, was the best moment to come from UFC 300. Arguably one of the best moments in UFC history. I've heard people say that was the greatest moment in the history of the UFC. And I'm not even going to argue with it because that last 10 seconds... I don't remember having that much adrenaline for one fight in the UFC, so... Holloway versus Gaethje, definitely, in my opinion, the best moment to come from UFC 300. And everyone knew it was going to be anyway. You ask anyone leading up to UFC 300 what the fight of the night's going to be, it was the same answer every time. Gaethje versus Holloway. So it definitely performed. In fact, it exceeded my expectations. And that, in my opinion, was the best moment from UFC 300. But yeah, those were the 5 best things to come from UFC 300, in my opinion. There are a few honorable mentions as well. You can talk about the Diego Lopez knockout as well and a couple other things. But let me know your personal favorite moment to come from UFC 300 or your favorite thing that I didn't include in this list. And thank you for watching.